Simulcast now with Colorado River District. I'm going to go ahead and start introducing Brad Udall. I think we're going to just be joining the Gigi's presentation as they start a little bit early, and then she'll be available for, sure, thank you so much, Terry. She'll be available for Q&A also. I usually refer to Brad Udall as the nicest guy I know with the worst news. So he's a senior water and climate research scientist and scholar at CSU's Colorado Water Institute. His expertise includes climate change, hydrology, and related policy issues of the American West. He's a contributing author to the 4th National Climate Assessment released in 2018 and a contributing author to the 2014 IPCC assessment report and lead author on the water sector chapter in the 2009 Global Climate Change Impacts. There's really few people who know the Colorado River and the dismal future better than Brad. And I know he doesn't like to be the bearer of bad news, but welcome, Brad. And I believe that we are now simulcasting to Colorado River District. So hello, everybody. Take it away, Brad.
Back at a place where I spent a good chunk of time here at the law school. And nice to see so many familiar faces. I first started talking about climate change back in 2003, and one of my earliest presentations was to a River District seminar, actually in Grand Junction, this same seminar. I mostly got a lot of dirty looks. And since that time, I've started calling myself the skunk in the room. And in watching yesterday, I decided that misery loves company because actually there are a bunch of mini skunks around yesterday here. Nancy Smith is not exactly a mini skunk. She's too nice, but she said I was going to scare the pants off of you, which is either a high bar or low bar, depending on how you look at it. So let's get to work here. And let me tell you what I want to tell you about today. I want to talk about the current basin status, including the reservoir levels and the shortage status, which everybody knows. I want to talk about unusual river flows since 2000, the reason why we're all concerned. And I want to talk about this in two terms, both in terms of the natural flows, but also in terms of the flows into Lake Powell, which are much less covered. And there's actually something scary there, frankly. I want to talk about potentially an evolving south to north flow decline pattern. And this is something I've always been worried about. And the San Juan River right now is showing a 30% decline in flow. If you're in Durango or Cortez, I would be a little nervous. And if you're in the main stem of Colorado, that number's about -5%. If the main stem ever gets around 20%, I think we will have a serious problem in this state. I want to talk about the recent 20-month period. And its contribution to the drought, because the precipitation during this period has been really unusual and disturbing. I want to talk about the role of heat in reducing flows, and that's what Overpeck and I have focused on, Connie Woodhouse, since 2016. But again, there's a new story, which is what's going on with precipitation, and we need to pay attention to that. You know, for several years now, scientists have said this is not a drought. It's not the new normal. It's aridification. If you're going to call it anything, call it the new abnormal. Normal implies some kind of predictability, and we don't have that right now. And then finally, I want to talk about the IPCC and their new AR6 sixth assessment report findings, just to put this in the global context. So everybody knows we're going to be below 1075 on January 1. Terry mentioned, 1068 right now at Mead, first ever tier 1 shortage in the lower basin. And the press is all over this. I mean, it's like a full-time job dealing with the press right now if you're working on this. So let's look at this. So these are the combined contents of Powell and Mead all the way back to 1935. To May of this year, with the May 24-month study out there in the blue dots. So what do you see? You see Powell and Mead 90% full, 47 million acre feet 22 years ago. And by April of 2022, they're going to have less than 15 million acre feet. We will have gone from 90% full to 30% full. And if you do the math on that, that's 32 million acre feet we've blown through in 22 years. 1.4 million acre feet per year, roughly the amount of lower basin overuse. Take off your water wonk hat and now put on the hat of a governor. Say a governor like Arizona Governor Doug Ducey, and you might wonder what he thinks about this. And in polite terms, I would argue to you that he would be thinking, I sure hope these people know what they're doing. All right, so let's talk natural flows and what's happened since 2000 plus our natural flow record back to 1906. This is a bar chart, obviously, of those flows, each year one bar across the bottom. How different were the last 22 years? So the two means, 15.2 million acre feet versus 12.4. That's a 19% decline. And it's probably even a little bigger than that because basically my estimate for 2021 is a little high here, but let's call it 19% decline. And there are the two different averages there. High flow years greater than 15 million acre feet, we now get half as many. Low flow years less than 10, 2.5 times as many. And I did a little Monte Carlo experiment recently where I took the 1906 to 1999 and tried to generate a drought of 22 years that has 12.4 million acre feet in it. And guess what? If you do this a million times, it happens once in 1,500 years. Pretty different, right? Let's look at the worst 22-year periods. So from 1906 to 1999, that's 13.1 million acre feet. And we already know what the answer is now. It's that same 12.4. It's 700,000 acre feet per year, which maybe doesn't sound like very much, but multiplied by 22, that's 15.4 million acre feet. That's 15 million acre feet, maybe a little less because there'd be an increment of evaporation on that would be in our reservoirs. Instead of heading toward 15 million acre feet next year, we'd be headed toward 30 million acre feet, a completely different world. Worst 5-year period, 10.7 versus 9.5. And I keep telling us we need to pay attention to that period from 2000 to 2004. That's actually quite a scary period. The difference there is 1.2 million acre per year or 6 million in total. And there are those two sets of numbers. So my take home on this is the last 22 years has no 20th century analog. They're completely different. And I think we all probably know that already, but it's worth at least getting a common basis of understanding. All right, so I want to shift to the unregulated inflows into Powell because people don't talk about these nearly as much. And so what are the unregulated inflows? They're the actual inflows into Powell with the effects of upstream reservoir operations removed. So they give you a good sense of how healthy Powell is going to be. And if you added the upper basin demands back into these, you'd have something like natural flows. So the 2000 to 21 average is 8.4 million acre feet per year. There it is right there. Now, Powell inflows tie directly into Section 3D of the compact, right? That's that 75 million acre foot, 10-year running delivery, whatever it is. I hesitate to use the word obligation, non-depletion obligation. Frankly, we don't know what that means, and that should actually bother all of us in this room. But they tie directly into that. And obviously, you cannot release from Powell any more than flows into the reservoir, less what goes out by evaporation, right? In the long term. You can do it in the short term. That's what we've done in the last 22 years. But in the long term, you can't do that. And so what's our take home? So if you take that 8.4 million acre feet and subtract 500,000 acre feet per year, which is what Eric Kuhn tells me is a good number to use for Powell, you get 7.9 million acre feet. That's less than the annualized 3D plus Mexico non-depletion amount of 8.23. That tells you the upper basin's headed for a compact issue with the lower basin here at some point in time if those flows continue. And this point, I think, has been much less talked about. And I think John Fleck did some numbers. If you look at where we're headed in Powell, I mean, you could see a compact violation by 2025 or 2026 if Powell releases 7 million acre feet, as it is supposed to do in that lower tier where it's headed. All right, switching gears to this north-south or south-to-north gradient that is now cropped up. This is an older climate model image, and it shows sort of red colors to the south, which are drying, and blue colors to the north, and Colorado splits this. This is something we've known for a long time. Depends on the generation of climate models you have on where that split is, but it's definitely an outcome of climate models that's pretty robust. So take-home point here, precipitation changes are generally small in Colorado, but there's definitely this north-south gradient. And I've been saying for years that southern Colorado is at risk of precipitation declines. And I just cranked the numbers on these. And these are 2000 to 2019. So the leaf area decline here is only 17, not 19%, because I'm missing a few years, all right? So there's leaf area at minus 17%. San Juan at Bluff, minus 30. Green River, Utah, 15. So just above the confluence. Colorado River near Cisco, also 15. So the two main branches here, other than the San Juan, are about splitting the difference. Dolores near Cisco. I mean, you could make a case that here's another southern stream that is showing a decline that's a little greater than the average. Colorado River near Cameo, only 9, so just above Grand Junction. Gunnison near Grand Junction at 17. Again, a hint of this pattern. Colorado Glenwood, minus 6. White near Watson, minus 19. So we're out of my pattern here. I can't explain that. Yampa near Maybell, minus 6, which is interesting, right? Given that the struggles in recent years to keep water in the Yampa flowing, you would think maybe something would be better there. I can't answer that for you. Green River near Greendale, below Flaming Gorge, minus 17, and below Fontenelle, minus 15. So there is this pattern, and it's not absolute, but it's certainly something to keep our eyes on. And within this state, again, the main stem is really a make or break point for our future. So in September, this report came out, and it's all about the last 20 months. Big NOAA report, huge number of scientists on it. What's it tell us? So this 20-month period from January 2020, August 2021 had the lowest precipitation since 1895. Third highest daily average temperatures, and what scientists call record high vapor pressure deficit. This is how much moisture the atmosphere can hold. It's this atmospheric thirst or demand that goes up at 7% per degree Celsius. It's the reason why we can have both more floods and more droughts. Our atmosphere can hold more moisture, and when conditions are right, it can send it out, just like it did this summer in Germany, where 160 people died, right? 160 people died out of those floods in Germany. And while this was not covered in this particular geographic area, I mean, I'll just remind everybody of the 116 Fahrenheit in Portland, or that poor town in Canada that had 121 one day and then was burned to the ground the next. And the scientists in this said low precipitation appears largely natural, which is certainly the scientifically safe thing to say. And they base this on one weather/climate model they use, but I want to put a little asterisk next to that, and I'll explain that in the next slide. And then again, this point that scientists make over and over again: warm temperatures that help to make this drought so intense and widespread will continue and increase until stringent climate mitigation is pursued. All right, so here's the key figure in this whole report. And you got precipitation there in the upper left, and you can see it's in the minimum and 5 percentiles in that 6-state area that the report covers. You can see the B temperature there, again, in the 95 percentile and maximum percentile. Eastern Colorado, a little bit out of that. But I want you to focus on that lower left-hand corner, D, Southwest U.S. precipitation. So this is the 20-month average with those circles. And look, if you will, at the relationship of the last 20 months to every other 20-month period on that chart. If you've ever done averaging with 20 of anything, to get in the weather world, to get a new record like that, that's hard to do. And that's why I question, how confident we are in, is this just really natural variations? All right, let me talk about sort of influence of heat on these flows. And I think most of you are sort of veterans to some of these points, but it's worth talking about them. So in 2016, Connie Woodhouse and her team did a study, and it's called Increasing Influence of Air Temperature on Upper Colorado River Stream Flow. And it was the first study to point out how temperatures were affecting stream flow. And normally we just think precipitation is the driver of stream flow, but they actually said, hey, temperature can influence it as well. Since 1988, flows have been less than expected given winter precip. And warm temperatures exacerbated modest precipitation deficits in the millennium drought. And what Connie is getting at here is this notion of runoff efficiency, how much water shows up in the river relative to how much precip comes out of the sky. And on this chart, those vertical pink and peach bars are years when we have low runoff efficiency, when not as much water shows up in the river relative to the precip that's out there. The green and blue ones are where it's really productive, that you get more stuff in the river, more flow in the river than you would expect. And on this chart, to the far right there, after 1988, you get those pink and peach bars showing this lowered runoff efficiency. In 2017, Overpeck and I wrote this paper, the 21st Century Colorado River Hot Drought, and what we really simply said is you can't explain the decline in flow based completely on precipitation, that you can explain about 2/3 of the decline. You need something else to explain the other. We said it was temperature, about 1/3. Why? More evaporation. It's warmer on any given day. A longer growing season, a thirstier atmosphere. All of that contribute to this evaporative load that prevents precipitation that falls out of the sky from making it into our rivers. Temperature-induced flow losses, we said, were about 6%, about 1/3 of the flow decline at the time. And by 2050, you could see that increase to 20%. And by 2100, 35%. And I'll just note, you really need to add about 15% onto each one of those numbers if the current precipitation decline continues into those future periods. So 20 turns into 35 at mid-century. This paper came out last year. Well-known scientists Chris Milley and Krista Dunn, USGS. Colorado River flow dwindles as warming-driven loss of reflective snow energizes evaporation. And what they tried to do was figure out how temperature sensitivity, what that number really is. And they said for every degree Celsius, you lose 9% of flow in the river. And they also made projections anywhere from -14 to -31% loss by mid-century if you only use temperature projections out of the models. They also suggested that if you use both temperature and precip out of the climate models, that you actually could buffer the loss. You could even potentially see an increase at 5% by mid-century, but that game works both ways, right? You can also get less precip, and that leaves you with potentially 40% loss by mid-century. And their images there, April 1, snow water equivalent, top, going down through time, their historic period, the albedo, the darkness of the earth. It's actually the reflectivity. It's the inverse of this. So that declining line means the Earth's getting darker because the snow melts earlier. And what happens is then the radiation curve goes up. You actually absorb more energy. What happens to soil moisture, sun beats down on it, it evaporates, right? And you have less again for your river. What I just said, as shiny reflective snow declines, absorbed radiation goes up. All right, let's shift gears and now talk about precip and how it's affecting flows. The 21-year period ending in 2020 is now tied with the driest 21-year period in the 20th century. And so this is annual precipitation, the entire upper basin. Precipitation in millimeters on the vertical axis, years along the horizontal axis. And the green line there is the moving average. And if you look way out at the right side edge there, you'll see it gets all the way down to the green horizontal dotted line, which is the minimum of the moving average. So again, tied with the driest 21-year period. High years in this blue box, I earlier mentioned these high years don't occur as often, right? In terms of flow. This is also the example of it in terms of precip, makes complete sense. I just want you to look at those three peaks and go to the left. Look all the way to the left and see how they match up with other years. They're all offset down, right? You don't really see much like that out there. Maybe a little bit over in the 30s and 40s, but offset down. Now let's look in that red box. Those are the low years. Those things are plummeting the depths. You can see 1977, if you look to the left, that's the prior low. But you can see 2002 in there. 2018 is that record low. 2020 is in there. 2021 is going to be awful too. Two of the last 4 years are in the bottom 10 since 1895. This year is going to be bottom 15, looks like. And so the main point here is this whole precipitation box, if you could combine the red and blue boxes there, the whole thing's just shifted down. So I talked about overpeck and Udall, or Udall and overpeck, Connie's paper about how high temperatures are influencing these flows, but let's talk about this low precip. And I want to make two important facts here. So this is a graph October through September. It's water year oriented. Again, precipitation on the vertical axis, monthly precipitation, and the blue line there is pre-2000 numbers. And what do you see? It's all about 30 millimeters a month. Most people don't appreciate the fact that it's pretty even throughout the year. We tend to just focus on that winter. June's the one outlier. It's at 20. And so historically, we've just kind of ignored that side of the summer side, right? So I'm going to add a post-2000. That's the red line. You'll note it's below the blue line, right, for most of those months. And I'm going to split the year into two periods. So fall and into winter, 5 months, October through February, right there. And then I'm going to do spring to summer, 7 months, March into September. And let's look at these two separately. So that box, or that new plot, is the difference. And again, that blue line sits below the zero line, right? Because we're getting less precip for most of these periods. What do we see here? So we get 2 months when precip increases slightly, December and September, right there and right there. We get 2 months of no change, October and May, right there and right there. We get 3 small, what I call modest monthly reductions, and they're all in this winter blue box, November, January, and February. Now let's focus on this bigger box, the red box, where the larger reductions are. There are 5 of them. So we got March, basically tied with the biggest reduction. We got April, May I talked about before, the green arrow. There is June, again, very low, July and August. So what's the take home here? So these precipitation reductions we're seeing are at the end of winter and early spring, so in March and April, plus into summer. The March and April declines are really important because when that precipitation shuts off in winter, that snow melts early. And it sets up this whole process where we can then dry out the land surface later in the summer, thanks to both high temperatures and this reduction in precipitation that occurs during that period. And there's a really interesting tie with soil moisture that I want to get into in the next slide or two. So summer precipitations, it's important after all. So let's talk about soil moisture. Soil moisture deficits from the previous year can be a significant part of the snow water equivalent that we see in this year. So this lower image here, you see the 2021 there, that's the amount of snow water equivalent above Lake Powell. It maxed out at 13 inches. The right side is soil moisture from the previous July. All those red colors, those are 12 inches. 13 inches of SWE and 12 inches of soil moisture deficit. Last year we had 100% snowpack and it turned into 50% of runoff. This year we had 90% of snowpack with 30% of runoff. I showed this slide recently to the CWCB, and a producer there said, Brad, you hydrologists are really slow on the uptake. We producers have always known that that first irrigation in the spring on dry soils completely disappears. So what about this year? So we had a good monsoon, right? Top 10 monsoon. On the left is September of 2020. So last year's September. On the right is 3 weeks ago, September of 2021. You see much difference? I don't. Same kind of 12 and 13 inches of soil moisture deficit. And I'd argue that 2022 runoff is likely to be impacted, and I'd also argue that the upcoming La Nina is something we need to pay attention to. Not all La Ninas are bad, but boy, they've been implicated in some of these really awful years. And here's the tie with soil moisture also. This paper came out last year by some really well-known climate scientists. And they said the 19-year period from 2000 to 2018 was the driest 19-year period since 800 AD, as measured by summer, that is to say JJA, June, July, August soil moisture. It's caused both by natural variability and anthropogenic drying. Without the anthropogenic drying, this would actually be pretty modest. This isn't a drought. It's really not a drought. It's something else. It's aridification, and it's got all of these aspects to it that we've talked about. Less snowpack, earlier runoff, higher temperatures, dry soils, thirsty atmosphere, moving storm tracks, which I've not much talked about, very difficult to prove, but I'll tell you, if you look at lower basin precip, it's also sharply down. It's down in every month, not just the months I showed you, but basically every month of the year. And this paper here is a two-pager on aridification that Overpeck and I wrote last year. That's an easy read. So just to review, why are these flows so different? Temperature, more evaporation and transpiration, potentially 9% loss per degree Celsius, and this decline in precipitation in these really critical, what turns out to be critical months. March and April, because it allows that snowpack to start melting, sublimating during that time, and also these summer declines that we never paid any attention to and thought weren't important, but actually probably are. And this image out of the Washington Post, this giant climate hotspot is robbing the West of its water. That article and others won them a Pulitzer Prize. And those big dark spots are 2 Celsius warming actually in Grand Junction and elsewhere. I'm actually working on a paper with Connie Woodhouse on the Salt Verde Gila, Upper Gila system, because we think Arizona actually should be really interested in what happens there. And the stunning finding to me about this is that there is 4 Celsius warming in March in parts of that basin. And if you look west-wide, those numbers are pretty close, maybe less, but March is really warming up. And it's tied to this drying. And this is also actually an interesting finding out of the climate models. Marty Hurling actually in 2019 wrote a paper that's not been well appreciated. And he suggested the temperature sensitivity is actually a lot lower, which is great. We should all feel good about that. But in the next breath, he says the precipitation declines have an anthropogenic signature to them. And if I had to pick one or the other, I'd pick the hot drought. I'd pick, let's have the same precip and deal with higher temps, but that's not what he's telling us. All right, so the IPCC in August released its latest findings. Humans have warmed all parts of our climate system. It's everywhere. It's oceans, atmospheres, ocean heat content, marine temperatures, melting ice. It rained in the top of Greenland this summer at 10,000 feet on the ice sheet. Probably the first time, maybe. Widespread and rapid changes are occurring. I mean, duh. Changes unprecedented over centuries to thousands of years, all kinds of new weather and climate extremes. These temperatures are going to increase to at least mid-century, depending on what we do. We're going to exceed our targets of 1.5 and 2 Celsius unless we get deep greenhouse gas reductions soon, and that means by 2030. More warming means more harmful impacts. And this, I mean, warming will intensify the hydrologic cycle, right? Every assessment that ever comes out, this is in the top 10 bullet points, and often it's like bullet point 3 or 4. More floods and droughts, changes irreversible for centuries to millennia, many of them. And these low likelihood, high impact events, we really can't rule out. Lower emissions, here you go, good news. You want good news? Lower emissions lead to noticeable temperature changes within 20 years. And then this second report here in September is part of the Paris Agreement. And basically they're handicapping where we're headed based on what are called nationally determined contributions. And right now we're headed to 2.7 Celsius warming based on what nations of the world say they're going to do. Way too high. I just want to note this piece that John Fleck and I wrote an editorial in Science this year, and basically we just kind of put it out there. What's the reasonably prudent thing to do here with planning? And we suggest we need to start planning for flows less than what we've seen in the early 21st century. And I hope John talks about this more. So I'm going to end here and go back to that and mention something that Jennifer Pitt has said over the years, which is, you know, this climate change is kind of slow moving. And if you can't get out of your way, it's a slow moving train, you're just being dumb. I think that's what Jennifer has said. I think that was accurate for years. I think now maybe that's changing. And that we now have a whole lot smaller buffer to deal with changes that are coming faster at us. And I'll also ask you to look at that just through a citizen who relies on this system. Just look at that. I suspect if we mess this up, they're not going to be real happy about that, given all the indications we have that there's a serious problem here. All right, that's it for Mr. Skunk.
Thank you so much, Brad. So we are going to be able to bring up Dr. Richard as well. I was told they're having a little bit of internet, but we should be able to get their audio shortly. And Dr. Richard, we might not be able to hear the questions on your end, so I'll say this to Brad and you. Maybe if you get a question, repeat it into the microphone so both sides can hear it. And welcome.
Thank you from Grand Junction. We're going to turn it over to Q&A, and I was wondering if we could offer the first round of questions to our partners there at the Getches-Wilkinson Center. I have Dr. Richard right behind me, and she'll be happy to answer anything, and I think we can pull up her slides, even if you cannot actually see us here on stage.
You ready? Yeah, Brad, thank you. Fantastic presentation. I want notes on everything. My question is, in your perspective, what is the role of the removal of 500,000 acre-feet per year from the western slope to supply the cities on the eastern slope in Colorado in the perspective of the flow of the Colorado River?
So see if I understand the question. You want to know what happens if we take 500,000 acre-feet out of west slope demand and move it to the east slope?
What is the proportion of the impact on the Colorado River of that?
Versus the west slope that I don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. What I will tell you is that, you know, obviously every acre foot's more or less the same amount and has the same impacts? I mean, with some subtle differences on where you're taking it out. There are obviously environmental issues here, but to somehow think that 500,000 acre feet here is different than 500,000 acre feet somewhere else, if I'm understanding your question, I don't see that as, at least in the bigger scheme of things where I'm dealing, that's just part of the problem. I'm sure there are, environmental folks here who are very concerned about where these flows, or where they're being reduced, or where they might be taken out. So I'm struggling to give you a good quality answer there. I apologize.
All right, another question from Grand Junction. Grand Junction.
So the question was about dust on snow and the source of the dust. And I think I'm going to defer that to an expert on our dust on snow effort, measuring it. There are, at the Four Corners region is a source area, but I can't say if recreational vehicles are the cause.
I'd like to go back to those trans mountain diversions. I'm from the Upper Colorado River Watershed Group, and 80 to 90% of our water, and I guess we're one of the biggest sources, is being diverted to the Front Range. And you have convinced us that Mother Nature has dwindled our precipitation and increased our temperatures, but the increasing trans-mountain diversions must have something to do with the water flow too. Certainly it is drying out our lands and groundwater, and that's why we are having problems with fires now. Thank you.
I just want to clarify one point there, that it is Mother Nature and human-caused climate change that combined together are producing the higher temperatures and decreased precipitation and decreased stream flows that we're seeing. So, yeah.
Question on this side? Oh, you guys haven't been shy yet. All right, Grand Junction, go ahead and proceed.
Hello, Bill Williams here. This last talk is just absolutely terrifying to me. And I've been involved in desalination and water efficiency for decades. But the thing that is really scary to me is the lowering. It's kind of like, okay, what are we going to do about it? We're going to be more efficient with irrigation. We can do all that. But the groundwater, or the moisture in the water dropping, and I think it sounded like an inch or two, that the water in the ground is dropping. What the hell are we going to do with that? That's forest fires. What can we do about it? We talk about the problem, but I'd love to hear some ideas on problems caused by humans. We should be able to fix it with humans, but how? What do we need? What actions can we and do we need to take besides removing GHG to really preserve the water and the moisture in the soil? Is there anything we can do about that?
Are you going for this one, Brad?
Sure. There was actually a presentation yesterday by Susan Martin, right? The NGO effort to try to identify 10 different potential solutions. And some of those solutions actually involve working on the landscape. So restoring natural meadows. I mean, beavers always come up, which seems on the one hand kind of stupid, but on the other hand, it's probably not. So are there things we can do with restoring forests, with trying to get more water stored high and using natural solutions. That's certainly part of this. There were 8 other solutions of some such yesterday that I don't really want to get into, but let me stop there.
Thank you so much for the presentations, both of you. Really fascinating and scary information. What I'm wondering is, to what extent are the various federal reservoir operators accepting and acknowledging this new information, as well as, say, front range water providers? Are they making plans to pay people to tear out that bluegrass or eliminate the rain showers in all the motels? How is the response happening with the water providers and the reservoir operators to the new information? Thank you.
So there are a number of urban metropolitan districts that are doing amazing things with water conservation, and there's always more room for improvement. And I think, again, I will leave that to an expert in talking about that. And I think, are we hearing from someone from Reclamation? I know in Boulder, they had a reclamation presentation already today, so.
Thank you very much for your presentations. Wonderful research and delivery. My concern is that in addition to the water issues from nature and your mentioning of the water problems related to human beings, we also have a housing issue. And, I keep reading about the development outside of Las Vegas. And my question is, yeah, we have a housing problem, and they talk about lots of development, but there's a water problem too. So that's one part of the question. The other thing is, what is the most drastic thing we would have to do to ensure that we continue to get hydroelectric power to those people that rely on that down from where that source happens?
Brad, do you have an answer there?
So two very disparate questions, right? I think there's a housing question in there, there's a hydro. Let me take the hydropower question, because of the two, that seems easier, more tractable. So you all heard from WAPA yesterday here, right, about sort of what they're trying to do. The hydropower conundrum is interesting, right? And the hydropower has always taken second place relative to consumptive uses in this basin. It's now clear that in some cases that hydropower also is super important for funding programs. It provides subsidized irrigation water for a lot of irrigators. So there are issues around that. I would suggest that solving the hydropower problem is a lot easier than solving the water problem, and we can solve it with money. I think we're also going to get to solve the water problem with money, but it's a whole lot more expensive. So I'm not as worried about the hydropower side, although it's certainly of concern.
Thank you, Mr. Udall. I'm curious, earlier this summer, last summer, we saw record forest fires, and just I think yesterday they had to shut down I-70 in Glenwood Canyon again. I don't know if this is incorporated in the data that you're looking at, but I wonder how these burn scars, how water retention in soil, when you've got 80 plus square miles of forest burnt in California in one fire, you've just got these huge changes in forest cover and living forests. How does that play into these models, and how do you think that's going to affect where we go from here?
So first off, let me just say, that's exhibit A of why we need to take care of these things both before and after this land surface question, right? And solving the problem in Glenwood, I'm not quite sure exactly how you solve that. We may end up with something that look like avalanche tunnels through there. I don't know. But really, we need to pay attention to these forests, and to the extent we can avoid fires, which is really a hard thing, but also make sure we do what we can restoring. I think your question also related to, how are models dealing with this? And I would tell you probably pretty poorly. Most of these models sort of have fixed land surface schemes in them and don't deal very well with big changes like that. It's a good question. And the other day, where was it? In the water fluency program at Water Education Colorado, I got exactly this, a question around what do we know about these changes, pine beetles, forest fires, how are they affecting runoff? And I would argue we don't know all that much. There were studies actually in the 1930s and later, what are typically called paired watershed studies, where they actually were trying to cut down trees to figure out if you could get more runoff. And there's some wisdom out of those studies in that you actually can't, you get a little more runoff if you do some thinning, but at some point in time, you actually don't. You get less. That bright surface actually, without trees, is more susceptible to wind scour, I believe, probably some more sublimation, more incoming solar radiation that gets absorbed. So there's a lot to learn in that realm, and I think we're learning by doing right now and learning by, frankly, awful experience. One other comment. So Hayman Fire in 2002, anybody remember that? Anybody here hike in Lost Creek Wilderness? Anybody driven through the Hayman Fire scar? How many trees are growing out there? 0. Do we want to do something about that? I don't know, but there's nothing growing 20 years later.
A little bit too. Joel Biederman at the from USDA ARS down in Tucson has been doing some work looking at impacts of different forest treatments on snowpack, and some of their recent research, so similar to what Brad was saying, is that there's sort of an optimum thinning of the forest that produces an optimum snowpack. If we have too dense of forest, then interception is high, which means the tree canopy intercepts the snowpack, and then that snowpack that's intercepted by the trees is vulnerable to sublimation and loss. And as temperatures increase, of course, that ramps up that sublimation process. And if we completely thin, then we expose the snow to solar radiation, and it's much more vulnerable to melting and sublimation as well. But there's this optimum sort of thinning level that produces a results in a little higher snowpack. And they're doing some new work measuring impacts of different treatments in the Chicken Creek watershed down in the Mancos River in southwest Colorado. There's a new pilot study down there working with those guys and with Western Water Assessment to look at that. So there are things we can do to help make our forests healthier and to increase or optimize the potential for keeping that snowpack on the ground where it can infiltrate and become our stream flow.
Brad, Daryl V, a real quick question. One serious, one semi-serious question. Groundwater aquifers, I haven't heard too much conversation about the impact to this conversation on groundwater aquifers. And the semi-serious question is, should I be investing in those futures?
Daryl, always pleasant to see you. The groundwater aspect of climate change is actually quite hard to study, and I would argue we actually know much less about it. One interesting artifact, these intense precipitation events in places can actually lead to more groundwater recharge. Typically light precipitation does very little for groundwater recharge, and so you really kind of want to pound the ground surface with precipitation to provide enough to really get it to sink in. But again, an area where we don't probably know as much as we should, and it's super important.
West Missouri, and I have been spending more time here on the Western Slope. And in Southwest Missouri, my business is water supply, and we run an annual water conference. And when we talk about climate change, even in 2020, 2021, people are skeptical about the idea of man-made climate contributing. There's a spectrum of understanding out there. I'm very curious, as scientists who come out and talk in the public sphere about climate change, what is your impression of the acceptance of climate change as real and as impacting water, not amongst particular segments, but overall, when you go out into the world? Do you find people more receptive now than they have been in the past?
As an educator, I'm certainly finding people more receptive than they have been in the past, from audiences, from college students, all the way through audiences with the general public. And I think the reason for that is that we're all feeling the impacts. I think in Western Colorado, it's really hard to deny that from day to day, from year to year, that we are experiencing impacts from climate change. So whether we want to get into a debate with someone about what causes that, I think sometimes moving past the cause and thinking about the solutions is where we need to move, rather than focusing on whose fault it is. But of course, one of those solutions is dealing with why it's happening.
Let me just add to that. If I might. Frankly, there are two states in the Upper Basin where this is a tough sell. And that concerns me about getting solutions that work. And I won't name names, but I'll bet you can figure out what those two states are. And it isn't just their water people, it's the people who the water people report to, it's those legislators that control water policy in those states. And I don't quite know how one solves that, but I think it's at least worth identifying it as a barrier to a really good solution here. And I'm not so sure it involves scientists. Frankly, the old model, the information deficit model, if we only tell people more, they'll understand. I mean, that hasn't really worked with a certain set of the population. And if anybody has any other ideas, I'm all ears. And I would love to get somebody else to be the skunk.
All right, I think we've got time for one more question. We have one from our virtual audience. If I can add this. So this is from Andy Ball. He lives in Eagle. So the last 2 seasons, I have done very little comparative snow shoveling while the ski mountains market good snow. I daily see no or minimal snowpack in the low valleys versus the top of the watershed. Is there a historical data point that reflects what is occurring in the low valleys versus where traditional data is located and published?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is exactly why we, Stephanie Kampf and others and I have been working on this monitoring system where we are monitoring that low elevation snowpack. Our snow tail gauges are all about 9,000 to 10,000 feet in elevation. And so we're not doing as good of a job measuring that lower elevation snow. And this is also a great plug for our Airborne Snow Observatory and doing more remote sensing snow measurement, which we can do to some extent from satellite imagery and then also from other remote sensing efforts.
Thank you both so much.
Yeah, and from Grand Junction, we really want to thank Brad and Gigi. That was a great presentation. Brad, our crowd got a little sneak peek that you were going to be a skunk too, so we appreciate it. Anyway, well, it is now time to bring in the Assistant Secretary for Water and Science for the Department of Interior, Tanya Trujillo.
format. And I also think it's great to have the parallel conference going on with the discussions there at the Getches-Wilkinson Center. I was able to listen to some of the presentations from yesterday, in particular the incredible remarks from Secretary Vilsack. And it was very inspiring to hear his statements and just reinforce the fact that we have a strong level of fire, natural disaster associated with climate change is unfortunately an opportunity that allows us to be able to do that coordination. And then I know a little later in the program there in Boulder, we'll hear from Mike Connor. We are all looking forward to having him be confirmed as the Secretary at the Corps of Engineers. It will be great to have him as part of that federal family and that connected administrative administration that we have to address the challenges that we see. And there are multiple challenges, not only in the West associated with the drought, but around the country. And looking forward to having Mike on board with us as well. The other presentations that are part of this conference, you mentioned it in your opening, Andy, but the other presentations are really, really great. I have been in the audience hearing Brad Udall's presentations for many years, and they are always sobering, always informative, and always motivating, because we do know that we have to continue our efforts to try to keep developing new agreements and new tools and new ways of looking at some of what we're seeing on the ground. And I look forward to having a discussion with Andy a little bit about some of that as well. And then looking forward to hearing Jack Schmidt after this panel, after our presentation, because his remarks are always enlightening, and I know the rest of the presentations will be very good as well. I think it's important, as many people have already mentioned, to acknowledge the impact of climate change and acknowledge the impact of the wildfires and the disruptions that they cause in all of our communities around the West, but not to say the least with respect to the air quality conditions that we see and the challenges that are associated with these interrelated and interconnected severe conditions. The storm systems around the coastal areas are seeing unprecedented levels. These challenges are why we are coming to work every day to try to think through how to address them. So thanks for this program's focus on drought, and appreciate again the leadership there at the River District. I think in addition, all around Colorado, there are many talented and experienced water professionals in the districts throughout the state. I think every corner of the state has folks that we're going to need to enlist your help in stepping up and participating in the interstate discussions that are going to be necessary as we do continue to navigate the next set of decisions. And those, I could say the same thing in every state around the basin. We have a tremendous breadth of experience. We have tremendous level of expertise and goodwill and good spirit that is going to be what it takes to help get us through the next round. I know we'll be seeing even decisions, this coming fall, this coming winter, and that helps us continue the trajectory that we do have of a strong, proven track record in this basin. We haven't even started the next round of discussions formally with respect to the next interim operations guidelines. We will be doing that along with all of our partners around the various states, and of course with our partners in Mexico, and look forward to continuing to discuss these issues as we go through this conference, but also just the additional agreements and the additional discussions that we'll be having on a routine basis. I know we can talk more about the current hydrology that we're seeing, and I know some of the other speakers have addressed some of this, but I think we all need to really be thinking about how to think creatively, how to develop the additional set of agreements and re-engaging in the spirit that we had when we were developing the 2007 guidelines. I know I, at the time, was working in the Upper Basin for the state of New Mexico, as mentioned, Andy. And we were working at that time, we had to be working on more than one thing at the same time. The New Mexico example that I have is that we were at the same time negotiating the 2007 guidelines. We're also working very closely with the Navajo Nation to finalize the settlement agreement and the legislation that was necessary to implement that important Indian water rights settlement. And just having to navigate through multiple things at the same time required flexibility, required coordination among the basin states. We had to think creatively about navigating within the law of the river to make components of that settlement work, to make sure that the 2007 guidelines settlements work. That same creative spirit, that same motivation to try to keep things on track is what we need to be continuing now, almost 20 years after that original, or after the prior round. I know, the Navajo is a great example of that settlement construction process has proceeded very well. It's great to have been part of that and to have maintained a connection with that project. I'm looking forward to celebrating the blessing ceremony for the eastern portion of that project's drinking water treatment facility that hopefully will be scheduled sometime later this fall or this winter. And it's again a tremendous example of difficult situation, difficult negotiations, but a very, very productive and rewarding outcome after we get things figured out. It is great to be able to learn how to evolve and to adapt from those experiences that we have had. I have also personally worked not only in the Upper Basin, but had the honor of working in the Lower Basin, and I will be forever grateful for the experience of having to navigate through some of the difficult issues within the state of California and within the agencies that contract for Colorado River water within California and among the Lower Basin states. It was an incredible experience to be able to work through the details of the drought contingency plans. We again had a creative, innovative attitude, but of course nobody. I'm not meaning to be Pollyannish in suggesting that we didn't have tough meetings and tough negotiations, but again, we were having to do more than one thing at the same time, always trying to navigate with the annual operations going on. At that time, California, as it is now, was experiencing difficult drought conditions. Again, very, very much an example of each state having to navigate the tremendous pressures that exist in each state at the same time as having to do the interstate negotiations and maintain that spirit of cohesiveness that we have been successful at in this basin. And then, of course, we all were engaging at the same time in negotiations with our counterparts in Mexico, and were able to develop the parallel agreements in Minute 319 and Minute 323 that ensured we will be staying in close coordination with Mexico as we face these drought uncertainties. And I think that's a theme that is sticking with me from Brad's comments, is just the fact that we don't know what the hydrology is going to be. We don't know how things are going to be evolving. But thankfully, this year, we've seen the prior planning efforts that we did in connection with the drought contingency plans have allowed us to be prepared for what we are seeing in the coming years. We are, just simply put, experiencing the benefits of having gone through the difficult negotiations that we did previously, both among our states, within our federal and state relationship, but also with respect to our international relationship with Mexico. And, unfortunately, the hydrology this particular year was not our friend. I perhaps had the naive assumption that the Colorado River Basin was going to be the easy project for me personally, as I was coming in as the incoming Assistant Secretary for Water and Science. I knew I had to learn a lot about Columbia River Basin, and there are many complexities just in the Central Valley in California that are very challenging. But unfortunately, the Colorado River Basin had its own set of challenges, and we just saw the conditions worsen throughout the spring and the summer leading up to July, where we saw the 24-month study projections that indicated we had reached the levels that were required to initiate the actions under the Upper Basin Drought Response Operations Agreement, the DROA agreement. We, again, had planned for this, but I don't think any of us were anticipating having to engage as quickly and as much on an emergency basis as we were seeing. So from the federal perspective, we appreciated being able to get alignment among the basin states for the actions that were taken. And after consultation with the states and acknowledgement from the states regarding those actions, we initiated the emergency provisions under the DROA agreement. The supplemental water deliveries were started in July, and they continued through this fall. Those deliveries will provide additional water, 181,000 acre feet of additional water to Lake Powell by the end of 2021. And I think all of us recognize that doesn't mean we're done. That only began the process of trying to work among the Upper Basin states to think through what additional steps may be needed, and to work through a process that will make sense for each of the other states. I know all of us, or maybe I should just speak for myself, that I am particularly nervous about concerns relating to the operational integrity at Glen Canyon Dam. The engineers use words like cavitation, and that gets my attention. And it's something that I know all of the managers in the Upper Basin are taking very seriously, and we look forward to that continued discussion about what the next steps are going to be. So in July, after that announcement was completed, we immediately again began to focus on finalizing the very important August 24-month study announcements. On August 16th, Reclamation issued the August 24-month study, which is the determining study under the terms of the Coordinated Operations Agreement, the Interim Operations Agreement for Lake Powell and Lake Mead. It's the determinative study to determine the release amount from the Upper Basin to the Lower Basin. It, based on the elevation projections for January, the release amount from Glen Canyon Dam will be locked in at the 748 level in 2022. And similarly, with respect to the lower basin, we saw that August 24-month study indicate the historic announcement of the first tier shortage in the lower basin. Again, thinking through and having been part of the 2007 guidelines discussions, we knew that we had these triggers in place. We knew we had plans in place for what to do if we did reach the triggers, but had not reached them until this year. When we were previously faced with challenges and drought conditions in the early 2000s, we engaged among the states and with the federal partners to develop the drought contingency plans that you all have heard many times about. The new announcements triggering the 2007 guidelines reductions will add an additional layer of conservation that will be required in the lower basin states. Those reductions fall primarily within Arizona. And I commend the state and the state of Arizona and the water users in Arizona and the tribal communities in Arizona for working proactively to think how to ensure that terms of the agreement can be met. Again, the August 24-month study also triggers the conservation provisions in the minutes with Mexico, and we will be continuing to coordinate with our partners in Mexico regarding the implementation of those agreements. I want to acknowledge the strong partnership that we had with Mexico. I think very recently, President Biden announced some congratulatory remarks for Mexico with respect to the anniversary of the independence. We are very much looking forward to having Ambassador Ken Salazar, as the ambassador with Mexico. I think you all know he has a strong background on water issues, and he was instrumental in participating and negotiating and finalizing the water agreements that we have with Mexico in the Colorado River Basin. So we are fortunate to have his presence and his leadership there to help us with our next set of challenges. I also want to acknowledge the newly appointed commissioners for the IBWC, Maria Elena Giner. We are looking forward to working with her, and it's great to have her in place to be able to continue the strong working relationship that we have. I would also acknowledge the service and long tenure on Colorado River issues of Jane Harkins. I want to thank her on behalf of our administration and many of you for her leadership, which was very helpful on several of our issues. And then also the newly appointed Mexican commissioner at SELA, Adriana Reséndez, who we had been working very closely with respect to the negotiation of the current agreements, and want to congratulate her and really look forward to being able to hit the ground running with respect to our next round of discussions and the next set of challenges that we have. It's great to be able to have that relationship to build upon. So then jumping back to the hydrology and the timeline, we saw as recently as last week, the Bureau of Reclamation released its latest round of the 5-year projections for the potential reservoir levels for Lake Powell and Lake Mead. At Lake Powell, the projections indicate the potential of falling below minimum power pool, which is the level of 3490. Falling below that level as early as July 2022, if we are seeing a continued streak of extremely dry hydrology into the next year. And I know we use the term falling below minimum power pool pretty easily now, unfortunately. I think we should reflect on the fact that that is a significant thing to happen. And again, back to the theme of uncertainty, we don't know what that means with respect to the operational capacities at the dam. If there is a continued level of operation without going through the turbines, without being able to produce the power. And that uncertainty just adds a level of stress and concern to how we're approaching the decision-making and the planning in the basin. The 5-year projections also show that beyond 2022, there is a chance that Lake Powell could fall below the minimum power pool ranges. And the chance ranges from about 25% to 35% over the next few years. And just the fact that we had established the level of 35-25 as a protective level, as a target elevation for protecting the dam. And we are seeing about a 90% chance of the fact that we will exceed that target elevation in a bad way. So we will drop below that elevation over the next year is very concerning. The uncertainty again means that we will be working within the Bureau of Reclamation. Our technical experts are engaged in trying to analyze and predict what the operational parameters may be looking like, try to be addressing some of that uncertainty, but it's a reality of what we have, that we haven't done this before. So we don't know exactly how things will be operating. I know that uncertainty was part of what was driving the development of the Upper Basin Drought Response Operations Agreement. And I'm very happy to know that there are ongoing discussions among the Upper Basin states about what the next iteration with respect to the responses may be. As I said earlier, we have to have plans in place to be able to implement them if we see conditions that are going to continue to raise alarms as they have this past summer. With respect to actions ongoing in the lower basin, well, the projections first indicated that there is a chance of Lake Mead declining to the third shortest trigger, which was the elevation of 1025. That trigger could be met as soon as 2025, and there is a 66% chance of meeting that trigger in that time frame, and a 22% chance of the reservoir elevation dropping to 1,000. And again, the third tier of shortage is significant because it triggers the additional mandatory contributions of conservation efforts from California, and of course, many additional layers of conservation in the other states as well, and in Mexico. I am happy to hear that the lower basin states are engaging and thinking through what additional steps that may be needed to be taken to conserve the additional water and to be able to prevent the reservoirs from hitting those critically low elevation levels. Within the Department of the Interior and the Bureau of Reclamation, we are working with our federal agency partners. As I mentioned, we have a strong partnership with the Department of Agriculture and trying to work really on additional ways to conserve water among the federal activities, but also incentivize more conservation in the states and in Mexico. We at Reclamation have been utilizing the authorities that we have and the funding that we have available to support additional system conservation efforts, for example, in the lower basin. Reclamation has reprogrammed $100 million of funding that had been available through other programs, shifting around to make sure that we have additional flexibility to be able to respond to drought conditions. The Department of Agriculture announced earlier this week the availability from within their funding sources, $500 million for drought relief efforts that may be utilized around the country. And we are looking forward to continuing to work with Department of Agriculture on our overlapping and complementary missions. And I think it's my understanding, as recently as last night, the supplemental appropriations that came through Congress in connection with extending the budgets in general, supplemental appropriations include on the order of $200 million that we will be able to utilize for drought relief efforts in different contexts. And we are looking forward to working within Interior and within Reclamation on ensuring that we can get that funding out into the communities in implementing the infrastructure repairs and infrastructure projects that we need to continue to build on. So that's great news. In addition, we are hopeful that the bipartisan infrastructure package can move forward as well. It includes significant additional investments for Western water supplies. I was able to testify in support of that bill a few months ago when Congress was first considering it. It was great to see the bipartisan support get through the Senate and move it forward. It appropriates $8 billion for the next 4 years for water infrastructure projects, for investments in rural water projects and aging infrastructure repairs. It also includes significant funding for continuation and expansion of Reclamation's Water Smart programs and for additional investments in conservation, recycling, water storage efforts. All of these tools that we have been able to utilize and that we have an expanded pool of potential to utilize. So I want to thank all of the folks that have been supporting those initiatives and supporting these funding initiatives, because it's essential for us to be able to continue to do the work that we are doing. I started off with mentioning my personal experience in connection with the Navajo Indian Water Rights Settlement Agreement, and the infrastructure package does include significant investment on the order of $2.5 billion to fund continued implementation of the existing tribal water rights. It also includes significant funding, additional funding for the USGS folks and the science work that supports our efforts. Reclamation has been continuing to provide significant technical assistance to the states and the tribes in the Colorado River Basin and throughout the West. With respect to the efforts in the basin, I really commend and compliment the team at Reclamation for providing accurate information, for continuing to evolve, and for continuing to think through how to best communicate and describe the conditions that we are seeing, and listening to presentations like Brad's and others about how can we better develop these tools and better inform our public and our partners for what to predict with respect to the future supplies and the future demands. How can we provide the best available information to ourselves and our partners for how to think through the planning efforts that we need to do? So the team at Reclamation is second to none. I have worked very closely with many of them for many years, and I appreciate their technical expertise and their solid dedication to public service. So little thanks, a big thanks actually to all of the folks that are working on these issues on a daily basis. There were some new tools that they rolled out in connection with the 5-year projection release. They included updated presentations and new ways of visualizing the information that they are presenting. And that, again, is just an example of how they are responsive to feedback and thinking about how to stay engaged and be supportive with the communities that we work with. I had a little bit of time yesterday to practice with the new innovative tools that are there, and it's something I even as a lawyer, Andy, I think it's something to spend a little time with and learn from what we have available to be working with. I also definitely want to acknowledge the role of USGS. I have the opportunity to work closely with them on a day-to-day basis. And I know they are working on, one of the things they are working on is the next generation water observing system that will provide an additional layer of high resolution data on stream flows, on evapotranspiration work, on snowpack analysis, soil moisture information, water quality information, groundwater, surface water connections, stream velocity distribution, sediment transports, and of course, water uses. And I'm tired after just listing that whole stream of information. But the data is, again, intended to be coupled with the modeling tools that we have within reclamation, within the forecast center, within the partner states and local agencies to help us make better informed decisions about our water use. The USGS has selected three basins to be part of this next generation water observing system. One of them is the Colorado River Basin in the Upper Basin. And it would be great to get a presentation and an update on that program at this conference in a coming year or another conference. In addition, back to our federal family partnership role, we have our partners at NIDIS have just finished a multi-day program regarding the drought conditions in the Southwest. And I know there was quite a bit of participation, not only from federal agencies, but a lot of the non-federal partners that we have that we're working closely with as well. So I appreciate the strong level of coordination that we have with those other agencies. Maybe I'll just highlight the most recent partnership that I participated in, which was earlier this week on Monday. The USGS and NASA completed the successful launch of Landsat 9, of the satellite that completes or allows us to continue that 50-year record of Earth observation that we have been seeing. And each iteration of that program, the images get better, the information, the data gets better and better. And we will continue to have increased capabilities for thermal sensing, for water quality analysis, for many of the tools that we rely on from the Landsat program for those years. So I look forward to being able to plan some events and have some celebrations in connection with the 50th anniversary of that Landsat program. And it was an incredible thrill to be able to be part of those launch events over the past weekend. We also have some other significant anniversaries coming up in the Colorado River Basin. Today actually is the 100th anniversary of the Lee's Ferry Gauge. And we know that is an important marker for us. And then next year will be the 100th anniversary of the Colorado River Compact. So look forward to hosting you all in Santa Fe, hopefully, for some events associated with that compact. The recent announcements do demonstrate the severity of the drought that we are seeing, again, not only in the Colorado River Basin, but throughout the West, and really emphasizing the need for us to continue to work among the states, with our tribal partners, among our federal agencies, with non-federal partners, to be able to continue the trajectory that we do have in the basin. The track record is proven. I think we need to, I like to copy a phrase from Andy, saying that our generation now needs to step up and be innovative, to be progressive, to be able to accept the challenges that we are seeing and work on those over the next few months and few years as we navigate things together. So I'm happy to engage in a dialogue with Andy, happy to go over questions from the audience. Really, really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this meeting, and again, apologize for not being there in person. Thank you.
Assistant Secretary Trujillo, I have to say the depth of experience and knowledge in the Colorado River Basin that you bring to Interior is really impressive, and given the huge plate you have of various items on your plate, it's great to know that you have that depth of understanding and experience. I do have one question, and then I think we'll turn it to both audiences to get some questions. But the first one I wanted to ask is, you definitely touched on the likelihood of the possibility of losing power or going below minimum power pool at Powell, and some of the concerns for the facility and the integrity of it. Along with that, the Upper Basin has, I would say, resentfully enjoyed the benefits of our over delivery of water under the way the 07 guidelines have operated, in that compact compliance was never a real issue on the horizon. For many years, it was a theoretical issue. As we see water year 2011 dropping off that running 10-year average, we have most recently been at about 92 million acre feet over 10 years in terms of our delivery. Those of us in the Upper Basin would say we have an obligation of 75 over 10. And so we've enjoyed that over delivery. You add the Mexican treaty obligation to that, obviously, to the extent there is a not surplus in the river system, the Upper Basin would owe 82.5 million over 10. When we run the numbers, and I know your staff and everyone around the basin has been looking at this, it is conceivable, given the likelihood of deliveries of 7.48 million in the next 3 or 4 years consecutively, we can see a time in 2025 or 2026 where we have actually dropped below 82.5 million acre feet. And my question for you, that just for the benefit of our audience, and I want to say you're speaking to two different audiences, one in Boulder that is primarily water policy. They live, eat, and breathe this stuff every day. They travel and see each other when it's not COVID on a regular basis on interstate issues. Here in Grand Junction, we have some of those same folks, but we also have quite a few water users, both urban water operators in the Western Colorado. We have some members of our Trans-Basin Water Diversion community here as well. And then we have a number of our agricultural operators here trying to learn about what's going on the policy level. I would love to know, what is it that the federal government would like to see out of the 4 Upper Basin states and the Upper Colorado River Commission as we see that compact compliance issue getting more real. And the way water years seem to fly by, 2025 will be here tomorrow, 2026 shortly behind. What do you at the federal level want to see from our 4 upper basin states with respect to concerns about that?
Well, thank you, Andy. And I just want to let you know that I have a couple of questions for you. So I hope we can get to those as well. But I think really the goal should be to try to continue to build off of the series of agreements that we have developed. So in connection with the 2007 guidelines, we established the parameters for the coordinated operations through 2026. Those rules will continue to be in place and will continue to be implemented. We also have the drought contingency plan overlays that the upper basin states, just to focus on that piece of it, that the upper basin states worked very hard on to think through how to work through some of the additional contingencies that we might be seeing in the future. And unfortunately, we are seeing some of the dry conditions sooner than we anticipated and sooner than we expected. So having to move faster perhaps than otherwise planned for in addressing some of in implementing and addressing some of the issues there. But I think there's more to be done along those lines and try to maintain the cohesive level of communication among the upper basin states with and between the states and the federal agencies are going to be critical. I don't think, and I'm trying to recall if I can remember correctly, but I don't think there are specific provisions about compact accounting in those agreements. I think the idea was to have a series of overlaid plans that can be implemented to help get us through the next few years and work continuously on these issues. I think I know, again, many of the folks who are in those discussions, many of the people who are very experienced in thinking about these things, and we have to just maintain a commitment to continue that spirit of dialogue and creativity, I would say, in trying to figure out the next set of agreements, the next round of these discussions.
Excellent.
Each of the states has challenges, again, and I don't mean that to say just to sound complacent in any way. I think we do have to be partners in trying to help incentivize additional conservation and trying to help think through what flexibilities might be most beneficial in a broad context. So I know there's a lot more discussion to be had.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Tanya. Appreciate that. I think that we're a little bit limited on time, if I'm not mistaken. But I did want to, given proper deference, if you do have questions, happy to answer those. Or I know that our audiences will both likely have some questions for you as well. So however you want to handle that.
Okay, well, I'm flexible, but I wanted to, the two topics that I thought would be nice for us to discuss would be, I wanted to hear more about your recent river trip, and it was great to see the bipartisan boat ride participants with respect to Senator Romney and Senator Bennett, and just would be interested in hearing any thoughts about how to help encourage more of that bipartisan spirit in our activities. And then also the other topic I thought would be good to discuss would be what suggestions might we think about for incentivizing the next generation or encouraging the next generation of professionals that are going to be part of our future as well. So those are my two ideas.
Those are great questions. Let me take the first one. I would say, just for the audience's benefit, Senator Bennett and Senator Romney, obviously two members of opposing parties. Those parties today, as I referenced earlier, are not getting along very well on the Hill. But Senator Bennett and Romney both are very interested in understanding and proactively addressing the risks that face our Intermountain West. And when they look out into the future, they have, I think, identified climate change as one of the biggest threats. And climate change discussions, as we know, have an unfortunate way of being very polarized on a partisan level. And to find two senators from the opposing parties being willing to talk about it is pretty remarkable. Senator Bennett, earlier in the year, had a roundtable. He put a roundtable together to talk about resilient, durable climate change policy ideas. And he utilized the Colorado River as the basis for that discussion because we do have a history in the basin of nonpartisan discussions around items in water supply. He asked me to chair that panel or that roundtable, and I did, on the condition that we had equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats, that we had the environmental community at the table, that we had industry at the table, that we had ranchers, farmers, and West Slope political leaders. And we were able to do that, and we met about 5 or 6 times and came up with a 6-page policy suggestion to the federal government regarding how to design and implement climate change policy that is not partisan, that is not likely to change every 4 years. And so Senator Bennett has taken that and initiated conversations with a number of Intermountain West senators, including Senator Romney. So we ended up, through that process about 2 weeks ago, floating down the Moab Daly stretch of the Colorado River, just outside of Moab, with Senator Romney, Senator Bennett, their spouses, some of their staff, some elected officials from Utah, some water folks from the state of Colorado, and had some really good discussions, very open discussions. We had tribal leadership from the 10 tribes partnership there. There were lots of important and discussions, and it was for me a refreshing opportunity to see that you can actually talk about climate change in a way that everybody doesn't retreat to their corners, that they don't feel attacked. And I think it's really important to be able to do that and talk about these issues in a way that we can, I think, first identify our risk and realize that it's a collective risk, and then look at the solutions. And I was really impressed with both of the senators, and if they could only have 48 colleagues that were as reasonable as they are, we might actually have some progress in that body. And I say 48, but honestly, I would love to see 98 additional senators do that. But that's, Tanya, I would say that's what it was, and I think it was a great opportunity. So it was really a fun trip, and frankly, any day I can be on the river is a good day for me. So it was good. Your second question, I'm going to say I might have forgotten what that was. So I apologize for that. I do, and I'm not dodging it, but I do think it's important to try to get just a couple questions from the audience. And I don't, I think we've got one here. And if, sir, if you can.
How do you plan on dealing with Native American Indian water rights that are dated back to 1858 and 1908 pre-compact? Colorado River Association and Board has not recognized any of them. So I want to know what you could plan on doing with them. My second question is, what about interstate leasing? There's a lot of us here that would like to lease water to help generate power, to help families down there in the California, Arizona, Nevada areas, and Colorado, Upper Colorado River District will not let us do that. Why is that?
Well, Tanya, you're welcome to take the question, but I think it was aimed at me. And I want to say, number one, the Colorado River District is not the Upper Colorado River Commission, and it's not in charge of interstate water leasing. I can tell you personally, from my perspective, to solve the problem of the climate change reductions in the flow, we need all of the tribes in the Colorado River Basin at the table, negotiating as sovereign nations with the states and the federal government. And that's my own personal perspective. That is not an official statement for the state of Colorado. I don't work for the state. We're a regional government here in Western Colorado. We have not ever taken a position opposed that I'm aware of, I should say. I have to say our history is a long one. So opposed to Native Americans developing, utilizing the full extent of their reserved water rights. In fact, we are supportive of that in our policies today. I would say that interstate water marketing, frankly, from a West Slope perspective, is a total non-starter. We will not support that, no matter whose water it is. And the states have allocations under the Colorado River Compact, and we believe that the states and the tribes who have land within them have the right to develop that and use it in a beneficial use in those political boundaries, not for the benefit of consumptive use in the lower basin or other places. So that would be our thoughts on that issue.
Danny, and with respect to the question about the role of the tribes, it's no doubt about it. The tribes are central participants, and that we are working very hard to make sure that from a federal perspective, we are engaging significantly with our tribal partners throughout the basin. There are many different layers of opportunity to do that, and we strongly support having that tribal engagement in that very, very important relationship.
Well, thank you.
Over here, Andy. Assistant Secretary Trujillo, we have a question for you from our virtual audience. My impression is that the Colorado Basin states and localities have been too timid and too slow in pursuing demand-side water conservation. What specific steps does the federal government plan to take to help accelerate these efforts, given that both a water and power crisis is likely within the next few years?
Well, I think one answer to that question off the top of my head is that the additional funding that we have requested and that we are receiving to help support programs like the Water Smart program are a great example of how we can encourage and incentivize more conservation. But there is a broad range of activities to undertake. It can be irrigation efficiency, it can be more water reuse and recycling efforts, it can be developing new technologies, and lots of different programs that we have available to help assist the states and the local managers in doing more of that conservation.
Andy, we have a question from University of Colorado.
Thank you, Alice.
Hello. Hello. Andy and Tanya, it's good to see you. I wish I was in Grand Junction actually instead of here. My question is, recently I saw a piece on the Sunday morning, Pat Mulroy, who fought as hard for Las Vegas water as anybody. Now as the Brookings Institute said that LA, Las Vegas, Denver, and the Eastern Slope and Phoenix are no longer sustainable from a water perspective. And we know that the discussions about the Eastern Slope needs to essentially get a lot of water to double its population. At the same time, as you all know, I represent irrigators in the West. we're watching a dismantling of one of the greatest success stories of American civilization, that's the ability to create our own food supply. How do we reconcile the reality of urban growth and the pressure that climate is putting on our ability to, both do wildlife and have food production in this beautiful part of the West? And I'm Pat O'Toole from Northwest Colorado and Wyoming.
I'll jump in, Andy, and then you can add to it, I'm sure. Pat, thank you for your service at the Family Farm Alliance. It's been great to partner with you over many years, and your organization is a great, strong advocate for family farmers around the West. Appreciate your service, not only in the Colorado River Basin, but in other areas. And I think the short answer is we're going to advocate for conservation in all sectors. And we have seen some great examples of additional urban conservation in the infrastructure package. We have authorization for the large scale recycling programs and reuse programs that can help communities do even more than they are doing now. So we're going to keep advocating for that. All hands on deck, all sectors should be part of this effort. And I don't think there's too much debate about that being the right answer for how we can move forward.
And Pat, I would add to that I think it's essential that we keep our productive agriculture in the Colorado River Basin alive. I've recently seen, I'm sure others have as well, op-ed pieces in the New York Times and other places suggesting that we should dry up all ag in the Colorado River Basin and ship our food production elsewhere. The author of the one that I'm thinking of suggested that you can easily shift that food production to the Midwest or the East Coast. Number one, given our logistical food supply challenges that COVID brought to light, there's no way that we could support shipping our food production out of this region. We should be enhancing our local food production, not ruining it. And number two, it wouldn't go to the Midwest, it would go to some other country in which we would become extremely vulnerable to the politics and the international scene. Again, not something that I or our organization would support in terms of energy, food security. I think that agriculture provides tremendous services, not just in food and fiber, but as you allude to, the ecosystem services. And it will be a balance as we move forward as to how to conserve water in that industry. But I do think that ag has to be at the table, and that water conservation in areas that will have the least amount of damage to our agricultural production and the families behind it is absolutely something we have to look at and we have to work with. And I think there are solutions out there. Pat, luckily you and folks you work with at the Family Farm Alliance are incredibly intelligent and capable on working on these issues, as are many of our other partners around the West. And I think I'm optimistic that we can get there. It is going to look different for ag, and it's going to look different for urban areas. I would clearly second Assistant Secretary's comments about the water conservation has to come from all sectors. And Pat, I know since you're stuck there in Boulder and not here, you didn't get to hear me say that earlier in the performance. But I do think it's really important to make sure that urban areas are absolutely joining in this, and that to the extent there's a need for additional water, you can't ask us to conserve water on the western slope only to enable greater transbasin diversions. It's not going to be something that we can support in the West. And I am now being told that we are over time and we have to cut it off. Tanya, I really appreciate you coming in. I'm sorry that you weren't here in person. mainly because I enjoyed talking to you and I would love to talk to you more, but we will. And thank you everybody in Boulder, and thank you to the Getches-Wilkinson Center for doing these, this simulcast. Thank you for the folks in our audience. And most importantly, thank you to Assistant Secretary Trujillo for coming in virtually. Our audience is going to transition out onto the terrace, which is out these doors to the left. And we will hear from Jack Schmidt, Professor Schmidt, starting around noon. Everybody, if you can, on your way out, there's some tables in the lobby here on the left, on my left, which will be box lunches for everyone. So if you could just swing by, pick up a box, and quickly find a seat out on the terrace, we would greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you all. This is good timing for us. So we are going to convene back here right at 12:45. So that gives you about 55 minutes for lunch. Be upstairs again, and it's a nicer day today. So there's actually outdoor seating up on that second patio. So take advantage of that, and we'll see you in about 55 minutes.